Let's see. The first question I see is from Stephen Toole. He asks, are any of the closed shipyards capable of being reopened in case of emergency, or are they completely defunct?
Some are, as I pointed out, in like the Tampa area, they're now housing areas. All the building ways, all the cranes and everything else are gone. There are some shipyards that are idle and just sitting there. To get them going again would take some effort. The bigger problem would be potentially to get the workforce trained again who lives in that local area. Let's note, for example, some of these shipyards have been idle for just a few years and some it's been longer. An example would be like when the base realignment commission was out there for the Pentagon over the 90s and the early 2000s. They would close, let's say, for instance, an air base like Pease Air Force Base in New Hampshire, or the base that I was born at, Mather Air Force Base, California. And they've turned those into regional airports, and all the support facilities needed for military aircraft have been dismantled over time or essentially, been allowed to atrophy. So there's the workforce issue. How do you get the workforce that's skilled enough to know how to weld or to assemble microprocessors or whatever the case is? There's also the land side of things. And another thing that we would have to honestly think about is in the 1940s, we weren't as worried about environmental damage. How many ships were built with asbestos, for example? And there are environmental regulations and safety precautions that we've since enacted for very good reasons. But in a time of a true national emergency, would it be something that would allow some of these closed shipyards to resume? That's a big question. One article I've read recently lamented the fact that there's very much a point on the near horizon where a shipyard there's a point on the near horizon where commercial ship orders in the United States, there's only so many ships that have been ordered. And we have priced ourselves out of the market competitively, and our own companies are buying overseas because, of course, labor's cheaper and they're buying the ships there, and we're running close to a time where there are no commercial ships being built in the United States, and those shipyards will also have to close. So it is actually a national security concern, and it's also essentially a production issue. It's a jobs issue. If a local economic agency is excited about bringing in a QVC call center and paying workers $10 an hour versus having a shipyard open where the starting salary is $35 to $50 an hour and employs thousands of workers, it seems like it's a no-brainer, but there's no work. And until the American shipbuilding industry is able to be competitive, we're not going to see something like that happen anytime soon.
Definitely. That makes sense. From Shannon Mathis, she asks, why do you think people were able to come together during World War II? What in today's society are we missing that our greatest generation had?
I will use my own life as an example. When I was little, I knew who my neighbors were. I hung out with the neighbor kids. We played together all day long. Of course, we drank out of garden hoses too, and look how I turned out. But, truthfully, we were more together in general. Today, and again, maybe it's because I'm a parent now, this morning before coming to the session, I had to drop my daughter off to go be part of cheer camp. I picked up my son's girlfriend, and brought her over here. So they're in there watching Friends right now. But realistically, we were just generally closer as a people. We didn't seem, when I was little, my parents didn't seem anywhere near as busy as I feel I am now. We didn't really have gated communities. We didn't try to exclude people. We have a society today that's very much a selfish society. Again, look at all the people who refuse to wear masks for what I would call illegitimate reasons, without getting into the politics of it. It's a common decency thing. It's a I'm doing my part to help you not get sick. You should do the same for me. That was not intentional. But realistically, we cared more for each other. Today, we're much more selfish. It's very much more an all about me, what can I get, you need to serve me kind of mentality that I see among my students' parents. If you go out to eat, you could see somebody who's getting uppity with a waiter or a waitress, and demanding, a lot of that server's time, attention, or just, kowtowing. And it's just, I don't think we care for our fellow man as much as we did in the past. And when we lost that, My contention is that, we got away from caring about our fellow man and being willing to, turn the other cheek, or to, think about how your actions will impact somebody else's, or just being kind in general. I mean, we can see the big efforts, like the community service projects we're all encouraged to do. We see those things, but how much of the news is in a 30-minute segment? In a 30-minute segment, you see a whole lot of negatives that people are doing to each other, and then they have to kind of close with a positive just to say, like, there are still redeeming qualities in society. I think it's just that we've, as a society, really stopped caring about our fellow man the way that we used to.
Fair enough. All right, from Hope Myers, do you see something similar happening with public and private cooperation through the new collaboration between Boeing and SpaceX and NASA?
Sort of. The way those work is that the near Earth orbit type things that are being done, stuff with support of the space station, launching satellites into geosynchronous orbits and things like that, are being handled by these mostly private concerns now, to allow NASA to begin focusing on the further deep space type operations, whether it's planetary exploration or sending somebody out to the moon or something else like that. The specialization on the private side has, number one, brought the cost down, but number two, again, allowed NASA to refocus where its attentions are. And it's worked in some regards. It's taken a little longer in others, like with the crewed stuff, the stuff that's going up to bring people to the space station. It's working. Possibly that's part of the solution. I mean, the Air Force, for instance, is looking at hiring private tanker operators to refuel planes in the air. That has been the exclusive domain of the Air Force refueling tanker fleet since the 1950s, and turning over a potential portion of our national security to private concerns, which, again, what happens if they decide they really don't want to get involved in a conflict zone? And then you have gray areas as well. But as we are in a completely different era, technologically, societally, economically, than we were in World War II, I think a lot of things are on the table to look for better ways to do things.
I see a raised hand. Ahmed Lalo, do you want to come on and say your piece?
Yeah, no, it's funny because he was talking, David?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I just kind of disagree with you that, like, people are more selfish now. I just think it's just a lot harder for people. So it's kind of hard to care, like, if you just shut down the economy and your whole livelihood. My dad, his job tanked. It was crazy. Like, he's an independent contractor. So he lost a lot of work because of it. Versus I, who was still working, I'm a doorman part-time. For me to wear a mask, it just made sense. But to him, it hurts a lot more. So I think people's, like, they're suffering. It really just messes with how they view things. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Thank you. All right, I'll go. If anybody else wants to say something, obviously, whenever you would like, it's good to have a dialogue. But I'll just keep going through the questions until I see another raised hand. From Ed Tweet, he asks, he says, we also do not have some of the high-tech raw materials in the U.S. The sourcing for some of the heavy metals used in electronics are not in the U.S. Do you know if we are stockpiling these just in case?
Well, I'll give you an example. When you crack your iPhone, your iPad, something like that, and you take it in to get the screen replaced, this happened it seems like 25 times that my younger son has done that, and it hasn't been that much, so don't get crazy on me. But knowing full well that the source of the touchscreen content comes from China, I said, look, I know if China decides to cut that off for us, what are we supposed to do? The U.S. military today uses touchscreen applications on an individual soldier's body armor in places. And I said, look, does that get recycled, or, how does that work? And he's like, nah, we just throw it away. And again, in my mind, I'm not a science person, But if you were to melt down, the cracked screens, and then, essentially make new ones out of the melted material, much like we do with 2-liter bottles, we could lessen some of our dependence. I mean, how many times have people replaced their screens on various smart devices? But instead, we are also in a very consumptive society where for us, a lot of things are engineered to fail, and then we think we'll just go get a replacement, which makes us dependent upon other people. And that also is something that, for example, in World War II, we lost out on rubber as soon as Japan took over Malaya. And suddenly everybody was, panicked about a source of rubber. You needed rubber for gaskets to seal an airplane door. You needed it for lifeboats. You needed it for gas masks. And people were going to places like junkyards and taking tires off of old vehicles. There was, all kinds of things that people were forced to resort to make sure they had the amount of materials necessary to continue on not only the war, but also daily lives. A truck that had to bring food to a supermarket, for example, was just as important as making sure there was rubber for a tank to close up against a potential gas attack. But they found a way to make it happen, but people had to get really, really ingenuitive with how they consumed various things, rubber being obviously one of the big ones. But our dependence on things from overseas, in a way, is a major Achilles heel. Let's look, for example, at least in my school district, we're looking at buying computers for our laptops for students who don't have access. We're going all virtual in a few weeks. And because COVID shut down China's production capacity for a while, there's no microprocessors, there's no computers, and there's a few other problems that we're running into as far as trying to get a computer in kids' hands. Drugs, and I don't mean the illegal ones. I mean the kind that are prescribed for us, or in some cases over-the-counter types. Most of them are made overseas. And let's say, for example, we got into a World War III scenario where these massive container ships, that are bringing huge supplies over all the time, start getting sunk. And suddenly there's no Tylenol, and suddenly there's no, Imodium, or, what other things you might want. We are dependent on an interconnected world at this point, and that makes us vulnerable.
Definitely. The next question I see is from Ray Sun. He asks, what prompted you to come up with this topic, and did you bring this comparison into your classroom?
Okay, well, to be super candid, I just wanted to be a part of the conference. When I saw the title of the conference, I said, this sounds like something that would be very topical. As was pointed out, I didn't know COVID was coming, and it struck. And of course, we all probably began noticing, certain parallels to things that were going on in World War II. But oddly enough, in May, there was literally just one weekend where I had this just absolute jolt of inspiration. And I wrote pretty much almost the entire presentation that you just saw in May, about what we did versus what we're kind of going through now. I haven't had a chance to really discuss this with my students. The last time I saw them formally was March 13th. And we just extended our summer for another 3 weeks, hoping to get computers in kids' hands. But it will probably end up being something that we discuss down the road. But in their very limited experience, and I teach high school seniors, a discussion about the national security implications of our consumption and our ability to produce things is probably too much like economics for them to be able to appreciate it.
Fair enough. We're closing in on time, so I'm going to read the next couple questions, maybe like 2 or 3 more, and then we'll just stop just so everybody's aware. Yeah, you can always reach out to David on your own. But okay, this is from Scott Seagraves. He asks, what role Scott and David were roommates, right, at our conference, so they're good pals. Scott asks, what role did the media play during World War II in rallying the troops, so to speak? Today, would they be more of a detriment than a help?
I would definitely say it'd be more of a detriment today. It wasn't until Vietnam that we saw significant amounts of media coverage that was happening in close to real time. There were prohibitions until 1943 against showing a dead soldier on a beach somewhere in the Pacific. There was a very, very strict censorship program that, basically tried to keep the war as distant and as sanitized for people as possible. Of course, today everybody's out to outscoop each other. Anybody with an iPhone is an iReporter. And as a result of this, it's really hard to do anything without potentially being filmed and having it uploaded somewhere. Look at, stuff that's going on around the country. The propaganda that was out during World War II to encourage people to ration, I think, again, you had a society that was much less going, no, it's my right to have all the butter I want, or you can't tell me not to bring my gas mask places. In this sense, people kind of got it, and there was leadership from the top from day one that really helped bring about what the threat was and why it was significant and what part everybody had to play in things. And, I'll use, again, my own particular example. Thanks a lot, Ron. I have a local government that feels that it's a problem and they've enacted a mask mandate. I have a governor who thinks that it's all getting better every single day. And bear in mind, I'm in Florida. So he thinks it's getting better every day and everybody needs to go back to school. And I have a president who's telling me I have to go back to school, but his own son's school is not going back, in-person instruction. We don't have a consistent message. And, the part in there about, who's in charge of the ventilator strategy, we didn't have individuals worried about, let's say, machine gun production in World War II. It was all directed by the national government. There was a clear order of things. And if you want one of two books, I grabbed these ahead of time. I love these two books. They're great, but they're more for the teacher, not for the student. One being Freedom's Forge, another one being Arsenal of Democracy. They both talk about what was going on production-wise, and the efforts that America went to during World War II. The people are writing, I can see it. But both of them talk about the production challenges and strategies that were going on during World War II and how we overcame those. They're both fascinating because they're very unlike anything we're used to today.
Thanks. Yeah, I know people are always looking for a book rec, so thanks for that. I think this is going to be our last question just because we want to make sure we have at least a 5-minute break. But this is from Brianne Wegter, and she asks, how extensive was the black market for ration goods in the U.S. during World War II? And were there other ways that Americans thwarted home front efforts for whatever individual reasons or choices that they had?
Sure. There was a black market, but if you were caught, there were severe penalties. Right now, as we speak, there is a literary agent looking at a book that I finished 2 years ago when I was at the conference, and hopefully it'll get published. But in doing the research for the book, there was an article, and this happened to be out of Wisconsin as well, where the governor's wife was actually found to be in possession of gas ration coupons she shouldn't have had. Other people were being stopped. There was like this one bridge that people were going over, and there were agents from the OPA, the Office of Price Administration, who were stopping people and checking through their documents. And if people were found, they were fined significantly. All of their ration coupons for gas were taken away. Not just what was over what they needed, but what they were legally authorized to have was taken away. And there were examples I also found in the context of the research for the book where people were sent to prison. Because again, it was based on what people needed, making sure everybody had an adequate, fair supply. And everybody's probably familiar with the victory gardens that were taking place across the country. There was a victory garden at the White House to help grow additional vegetables that didn't count against your ration points. Again, in research for the book, there was, I want to say San Jose, California, 90%, 92% of everybody who lived in San Jose, California, again, it's an urban area, despite the fact they were in an urban area, had access to a victory garden to raise additional vegetables and fruits to supplant what it was that they were consuming. And just as a quick thing, I know she said, last moment, I intended to originally do a Survey Monkey thing to send out to everybody, asking amongst your students, if there was a World War III type Pearl Harbor thing that occurred, how many of our students would take part if called or volunteer, and how many would absolutely refuse? And I only ended up doing that with my own students. 27% of my students said, even if there was a Pearl Harbor type event, and these are people who know what Pearl Harbor is all about. I teach World War II for like 3 months. 27% of my students said they would not even take part if the government called them up. And we definitely have a different generation in terms of willingness to serve. And that's also another area to be potentially concerned about.